Well, Sensei, we may be joined after we get started, but why don't we have a nice group already, so I can impose on you to lead us off?
Okay, everyone, please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu. Well, Sensei was letting me know at the start that before he goes ahead and begins a session, he actually likes to find out what people have heard from his previous lessons, or if you recall back in the pre-pandemic days when we would attend services, or in the videos that we've been doing since March, what you've been hearing, and if how that is working for you or making sense to you, and if you have questions. So I can pick on people if you want, or if somebody wants to jump in. Lorena?
I really have been enjoying them. And in fact, I use it when I'm exercising, which I know is probably not the best thing, but that's my only quiet time. And there was a Wednesday one, I'm going to say it was like 3 weeks ago. I thought that was the best. I really thought that it spoke to me. And I even stopped walking to like really take it in. So Sensei, I really think that you're just, I don't know, it was really good. And I think I think you're getting better at this video stuff. And so it was a really, really good one. And I really wanted to thank you for that one.
Okay, thank you. Well, the reason I'm asking is the format for most Jodo Shinshu sermons or Buddha Dharma talks are that we just talk, 20, 30 minutes. And I've always said that's like bingo. I'm calling out numbers. And what I've been doing is trying to give a process. The thing that this process depends on are people doing the process, the practice, and that's what we talked about last week. And it's a little confusing because I think we alternate between the Dharma talk on Sunday and the Buddhism 1, 2, 3. And I try to connect the Buddhism 1, 2, 3, but interspersed in between are the Dharma talks. But what I've been saying is that the talks only constitute information. And this is information a lot of people have. But unless it becomes a practice, it just remains information. And that's what I'm trying to get across. Because the way I've been talking, and some of the people who have been around the temple can attest to this, I've been presenting things in a different way. I haven't been interpreting or translating the sutras or the stories. Because I feel it's a slow process. And I really think that the practice is important. So that's what I wanted to get with this kind of Zoom, where people can actually have a discussion and talk about what their practice is or how it's working. So let me hear from people. What have you heard and what practice are you doing?
I remember that one of the lessons you said was when we wash our hands to say thank you.
Okay. Good. Others?
In my case, Sensei, during this whole pandemic, I think it's a lot of information overload. We're constantly being bombarded with information that may be somewhat informative, but mostly I think, or at least I say it from a personal standpoint, that in most cases it just increases my stress level. So based on what you've discussed in some of your past videos, and also some of the reading that I've been doing, I try to focus more on the Buddhism side, the Buddhist philosophy, than that obsession where I want to be informed on a daily basis, and sometimes even like multiple times during the day. I mean, I don't need that.
Yeah.
That only increases my level of stress. So I've made it a point to watch your videos. Sometimes I've watched videos from other ministers, other temples. I've tried to read a bit more books about Buddhism. I'm I'm reading one from by I think not Han right now, and I can, between the reading and the videos, the ideas that come to me, I think I handle my daily activities better.
Okay.
I sense that I'm calm most of the time. I haven't been watching a lot of TV lately. I mean, even weeks ago, I would just sit in front of the TV and do the binges with Amazon Prime and Netflix and stuff like that. And eventually got to the point where I was thinking, hey, how does that make you feel? And I would notice that after watching several movies or series, I wasn't very calm. Even if it was something that I enjoyed, movies that I enjoyed, afterwards I would feel that it was either I felt like it was a waste of time, and also I felt that my stress level went up, like I wasn't really calm. So now I try to focus on Buddhist philosophy. I try to watch your videos. I will try to read, and I think it is working for me.
Okay.
If I compare how I feel right now as opposed to February, March, I mean, the stress level was very, very high back then. And nowadays it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things I can't do right now, but at the same time, I feel lucky that I still have a job. My family is healthy. I mean, so many things that I can say, that I can think of, and makes me think, look, you know what? Things are not that bad. But I think in a big way, it's been the videos that you've been making, the ideas that you sent to us, plus the reading. It just, at least in my case, it really centers me. It really calms me down.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Others, what have people taken away from the videos, either Sundays or this Buddhism 1, 2, 3?
Well, one thing during this pandemic and like some of the stuff you're saying, is like the things she didn't notice before, it's like you're noticing and you're so grateful for, like the Clorox wipes and all those things that you would have just taken for granted. You wouldn't even be thinking about those things. But now it's like, oh my God, they're so important. And you notice all these things you didn't notice before.
Like toilet paper, Shirley.
Yes.
Don't go there.
Thank you, Evelyn.
I've kind of reverted to the way I was before I was at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading Buddhist magazines, and Buddhism just kind of bubbles up for me in my daily life. I'll be thinking of something or talking to somebody, and I'll think, oh, well, that's so Buddhist, or Buddhism has something to say about that.
Yeah.
But I've watched the videos. My favorite one, I'm sorry to say, Sensei, was that guy from another temple.
Reverend Adams?
Yeah, for Hanamatsuri, was it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he was just excellent. I really enjoyed his, but I can't remember exactly what it was I enjoyed about it, but I got a lot out of his.
Let's see, he spoke, let's see, again. It was a process, yeah, now I can't remember either, but yeah, there was a process.
Yeah, but generally this has been a great time for me. It's like my dream come true. I get to stay home all the time. I don't have to see people. I'm mildly agoraphobic, and I don't ever really want to leave the house. So it's been wonderful for me. I'm not stressed.
Yeah.
I find I'm less stressed now than I was before the pandemic.
Yeah. Well,
it's called retirement.
Well, I've been working on one thing, and it seems repetitive. And as I said, it is if it's just something we're listening to. But the emphasis in Shin Buddhism is this Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. And we've taken great pains in trying to explain that in Buddhism. I mean, as ministers, we do that. And I have found over the decades that it's very difficult to do. And so I've simplified it to this thought of receiving instead of achieving. Because I think that's a major difference between Shin Buddhism and other sects of Buddhism and many other religions, where we're asking for something in the future. But the thing I've been trying to get across, and this is what I've learned from being in the community of Shin Buddhists, is this attitude of gratitude. And so the last at least 3 Buddhism 1, 2, 3s I've been doing, and this is what I do in my day class, is trying to make the point and give the rationale of how this is done. So let me run through that and then get your input on whether that is what you heard. Because I know people hear parts of it, but this is good that I'm getting feedback, because I want to know what parts need to be, where I may need to clarify some things. So the first thing is that I'm defining Buddhism as a process of waking up to true reality. So all we have to do is define true reality. Okay. That's everything.
Yeah.
And that Shin Buddhism is particularly suited for the working family person, just an ordinary person, not a monk. And I think one of the difficulties we have is that so many people are trying to live the life of monks and nuns while being an average working person. And so what has worked in Shin Buddhism is this whole shift in attitude. And this is where I used Shinran's, in Shoshinge, he talks about the clouds and mists of anger, greed, ignorance. So what that represents are all the problems we have, like the COVID-19 virus. But he says, beneath the clouds and mists of ignorance, there is lightness, not dark. So I think the point Shinran is making is that there's always a bright side to life. And to become aware of that, it's this connection with gratitude. And so what did people do that coin flip? We've done that at the retreat. Remember that? Can anyone repeat what that coin flip demonstration?
The 50%, the 100%, the other.
Yeah. How would you describe that? What did we do and what did you get out of that?
The second time you said to flip it, look what it is, and then call it, and then you get like 100% correct, because
right.
you're dealing with what really happened and not trying to guess what's going to happen.
Yeah. So did you do that?
Well, I just heard what you said, that I knew it would work.
Arturo, you did the first one too, right, at the retreat?
Oh yeah, and then when we went to that retreat, yeah, I do remember. I remember doing that back then. This time I didn't really go through the whole thing, but I mean, I reasoned it, and yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's one thing that you're flipping the coin and you're hoping to get something. You may or may not be right, as opposed to if you flip the coin every single time you see what it is, you identify what it is and you accept it, and you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what realization did that have for you? How did that translate to your life?
Well, that the way I see it is that I identify the situation that we're living through, or it could be the pandemic, could be work, could be personal life. I mean, I see it, I identify it, and I accept it. Oh, okay, this is a problem that I may have at work, or this is, I may get sick, whatever, but you're seeing it and you accept it, as opposed to flipping the coin and always hoping to get something, which could be on a personal level, something at work, something, in my family or whatever, which leads me to sometimes I may feel satisfied. Oh yeah, this is what I wanted. Other times I may not, because in reality, this is what I was hoping for. I prefer flipping the coin and okay, heads, tails, whatever, because I'm seeing what it is and the result, and I accept it, and instead of worrying about what may be.
Yeah.
So whatever happens, whatever comes your way in life, you can be okay with it.
Exactly.
You can be even more than okay with it. You can look at, okay, so this horrible thing happened. What's the bright side of this horrible thing?
Mm-hmm.
I do this a lot, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how do we get to that point where things are okay? You know, with every situation.
It's just an attitude, isn't it?
Yeah, but how do we make that part of how we respond in life?
Just by noticing it in your life whenever something happens that you think is bad. I try and look at what's good.
That's where I brought in the example of my grandmother who, when she broke a dish, my cousin would say, she would say that, oh, that's good for the potter.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking of the other person, you know, the we, not the me, so much. I mean, we don't do that with great happiness, but it is a shift.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I was using as a practice, and then I brought in that whole thing with Karate Kid, where he's painting the fence and walking the car, doing these things that we think are irrelevant, or we don't know why we're saying this thank you. But it is a practice leaning toward Nembutsu. Because Nembutsu, you know, we say all you do is say Nembutsu. But if we don't have an emotion or an experience behind it, it's just like saying abracadabra or, you know, just saying some words. But what I'm trying to develop is this attitude of gratitude. Now, the Contemplation Sutra says there are 9 levels of people. Okay, the highest of the high, the middle high, the lowest of the high, and then the middle group is the highest of the middle, and the lowest of the middle, and then the lowest group, the highest of the lowest, the middle of the lowest, and the lowest of the lowest. And he says, we're actually in the lowest of the lowest. My question has been, how does the person, you know, the monk or the people in the highest of the highest, how did they get there?
They bribed somebody.
Okay.
Practice.
Yeah. Did they get there when they were 10 years old? I mean, were they born that way or when they were 20? See, they don't tell us that. They just tell us there are all these great masters, 10 for 10, you know, 9 out of 9, and we're 1. You know?
Greg should be joining us, by the way.
Who's that?
I had just admitted Greg. I don't see him popping up on screen yet, but he may be joining us.
Okay. But that this is done through a process. And the process is what I call selective seeing. In other words, we see things that we're interested in. And that was that example of the family walking down the street. Yeah. That, you know, the kid sees a sports car and the little girl never sees that.
Exactly.
And the husband never sees the decorations on the door and, you know, the gutter and all that. And so what I'm trying to develop is a practice of artificially washing the fence or painting the fence, artificially, you know, like Shirley said, washing your hands and saying thank you. That the practice I've recommended is this Kaizen, one little step at a time. Once a day, find one thing to say thank you. And then after a while, find 2 things. And this little thing of finding simple things to say thank you hopefully will shift our mindset, where Evelyn is in 8 out of 9, the middle of the highest, Evelyn. You know, you have this thing where
I need to donate some more to the temple, right?
Yes. That'll get you in the highest of the highest. So it becomes a natural way for you. But I think it has to be practiced. And although this is an artificial practice, this is what I'm saying. I want to get into some other things with Nembutsu, but I find that this gratitude is the simplest way for us Americans. The other things we'll talk about is acceptance and, you know, all these other things, which are very hard to set up a practice. But gratitude is something that people are already familiar with. And Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, is not just thank you, but it's the beginning step. if we can start to develop that and really find the lightness under the clouds, like I said, at every instance, flip that coin, see what we have, and say, oh, I want this. You know, I have a fender bender. I want that. I wanted to paint the car anyway. But yeah, there are times when it doesn't seem to work, and yet it needs to work. I mean, it doesn't need to work, but it is a way that will resolve life's problems. And it's the way we look at life. And so that's what I've been trying to do. But without that practice, it's just more information to me. It's a philosophy. And that's where I think I said, maybe on a Sunday, that the words we hear, the information we get, you know, like you were saying, Arturo, it's just more information. With a practice, it becomes a way of life. And it's that way of life that culturally is embedded in the language and the ritual and the customs of Japan. Well, we're not Japanese. And so we have to, in a sense, artificially, selectively see these things that we find every day. And there are a lot of Americans who live this way, you know, either naturally or because of their religions. But this is, I think, is a practice that needs to be developed. I think it's more effective than sitting in meditation, in that it's something that's with us all day long. All day, and then that, I think the last talk I gave last week or Sunday, the process of meditating in the morning, thinking of one thing to appreciate, finding that during the day, you know, reinforcing it. Going from meditation, mindfulness, effort, you know, livelihood, conduct, thoughts, or speech, thoughts, and then perspective. That it is a practice we could do using the Eightfold Path. And that's what I've been trying to get. So I guess...
Sensei, I have a question.
Yes.
Is this, so I said something about looking on the bright side of things, or like if you get a fender bender,
yeah,
you're providing somebody else's livelihood gets enriched as a result of that. But is it more than that? Is it embracing all of life, no matter what it is?
Yes, that's the point of it.
Okay.
Because we're going to die. That's what I hear. So how does thank you resolve the fact that we're going to die? And this is where I think it needs a practice before it comes to that point that we find out, hey, I'm going to die. That I've seen it in many, many, you know, Shin Buddhists. Two of my good friends passed away, you know, less than 10 years ago, you know, about my age with cancer. And in a sense, they weren't prepared for it, but I've seen older people just take it as part of life that we are going to die. And there is a sense of gratitude. And I've used that point where at the end of life, are we going to say, oh, please, one more day, one more week, one more month? Or are we going to say, thank you for the last month, for the last week, thank you for the last day? So that doesn't come just automatically. Like everything, it takes a practice. And so the problem with the word practice in Shin Buddhism is that we've been saying for decades, you know, from the clerical side, the ministerial side, we don't practice as Shin Buddhists. And so there's this taboo about doing something. And the difference I've been trying to make is that we practice, but it's not a practice to achieve any other level. It's a practice of acknowledging what we receive. And I think everything, you know, requires a practice. Everything we've done in life, we've done clumsy first steps, you know, repeated it until it has become natural. Speaking, riding the bike, playing the piano, everything has taken a practice. And so this shift in attitude takes a practice. It doesn't just come. There are other things. And another area that I'll be going into is this acceptance of self. You know, that's another real deep aspect of Shin Buddhism. You know, accept it just as I am. But anyway, I'm glad we're having this kind of discussion, because I have a sense, because every so often I'll ask who's been practicing thank you, and we do for a certain extent, but it's really an ongoing thing, and deeper, where at every instance you're saying, oh, I can appreciate it. I can see a different side of it. Does that start to make sense? Hello?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Has that level affected anyone here? That it starts to shift and life has gotten better?
For me, I'm going to say that I have been working outside of my home since I was 15. I have 3 kids, and I've just made it work. And this is the first time that I'm home all day. I'm still working from, my computer, but I get to have lunch with the girls. I've been making my own bread. I've been doing what you're supposed to do, make the masks, garden. And yeah, it's horrible that there's this horrible pandemic, but I have really enjoyed it, staying home. And my Amazon account, I have the smiles that goes to the Buddhist temple. So I'm sure you guys are making some type of donations on that. So I really have been, yes, this is a horrible time, but I'm so grateful to be able to be at home for once, really.
Yeah.
Sensei, for me, what I've noticed, and for me, it ties into the coin flipping exercise, but I find myself more able to deconstruct my expectations at least a little bit. So I don't get as upset or disappointed. I'm not saying that I'm there yet, but I've been pleased by the initial development anyway.
I'm just happy to be alive with the pandemic going on. And you think like, oh, if you go out, there's germs everywhere. So I'm just happy, like each day is like, oh, I'm still healthy. I haven't got it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the fact that we have computers and, we could connect with each other. Yeah. So I think that's what Buddhism offers. And, it does offer these things of peace of mind with meditation and so forth. But Nembutsu can do that too. And it's an all-encompassing thing. But it's difficult to define without an experience. And I'm starting out with gratitude because I think that's fundamental. Now, to, again, validate how it works is this Nishu Jinshin, which I, started last time. And what that says is there are 2 aspects of deep mind. And it's the same thing that the 18th vow says in a way. But this is fundamental to Buddhism. And again, from the Japanese point of view, and this is why it's so difficult to, I think, accept the Japanese version. The Japanese version keeps saying, I'm an evil person. I'm the worst scum of the earth. And at that point, everything opens up. As Americans, I say, I'm, kind of bad, not real bad. But anyway, it's borne out in psychology. And when I first saw it in Transpersonal, this guy named Assagioli, who's contemporary of Jung, he's Italian. And so he hasn't written that much, but a couple of his books and some articles were translated into English. I was fortunate to be at a school where a student of his, was, an American, was in Italy and studied with him. But he has the psyche drawn a little bit different than, what we usually see. The id, the child, the ego, and then the parent, the adult and the ego. And that's written in different ways. But with Assagioli's, it's called the egg. It's the shape of an egg. The middle is what he calls the middle unconscious, and that's where the ego is. But he has the higher and lower unconscious. And when I saw that, I said, that's Shinran. That is this 2 aspects of deep self. And it's that with the unconscious, the higher and lower drifts into the middle, and from the middle unconscious, we can make that conscious. But what that says is that when we access the lower, we're open to the upper. or when we access the upper unconscious, the lower unconscious. In other words, when you feel completely accepted, from the higher unconscious, you can accept the deepest part. Or when you admit to your most degenerate self, the upper unconscious opens. And that's kind of a sloppy way that I'm defining it, but that's kind of what the general thought of Nishu Jinshin. It sounds very mysterious and it doesn't fit logic. Our logic is I'm good, so I'm, I'll go in the high ground. But this goes the other way. And what Asajoli is saying is that this is part of our psyche. This is how we are as humans. And that's what Shinran has said. So I think these masters really knew about these things without having a model of the psyche, but they found that this worked. And that's kind of the basis of Shin Buddhism, where we say, I'm the most ignorant person. And then we're open to Amida's compassion. But anyway, that's where I find that this thought is validated. This ancient thought is validated by modern psychology, in that there is a model of the psyche. The other thing I really like to talk about is, our hang-ups, all the problems we have. They're all kind of rooted in our childhood. And it's called the primal wound. We are not seen for who we think we are at 5 years old. We want to be seen, for, like, if I'm a kid, I want to sing and dance and be appreciated for that. And then my parents said, you're too noisy, And so we stuff that. But that becomes our shadow. In fact, we could be very smart and want to show off, and our parents say, you shouldn't do that. And so we limit ourselves, when in fact, as an adult, we should kind of champion our own, unique powers. But anyway, this is where just about all our, problems are places where somewhere in our childhood, things were stuffed. And then we repeat that. Again, something happens in junior high school, and it reinforces that fact that, I shouldn't be like this. I should hide that. And then as a young adult and so forth. And I like to say, there are certain people in politics who, I won't mention, you watch TV and you might see some, who exhibit the tendencies of a junior high school kid. And you wonder, why isn't, a 70-year-old mature? We're stuck. Most people are aware of that and hide that. Some people can't even hide that. But anyway, the scary thing is that's how we are individually. Just some public people show that publicly. We kind of are smart enough to hide it and, pretend that we're okay. But anyway, because it's a childhood, not discrepancy, but, limit, we can heal that. And we can let go of that. And that's where, again, we have this language of liberation, that Buddhism is about liberating, letting go of those tendencies, being who we are, and accepting that in the readings that you might do, we're always reading in Japanese language, the evil self. And basically all he's talking about is the egocentric self. We're not evil as we might interpret that word, but the egocentric, the self, the child who's always thinking of me first. And it's that shadow. Again, working with this guy Plotkin, he's a depth psychologist. He asked me once about, how Shin Buddhism, and I thought that's all Shinran talks about is the shadow, this dark side that we hide as kids, that we find that our family or the community says was unacceptable. So again, this is where Shin Buddhism says, no, be yourself, open up, getting past the community standards. So what are thoughts on that? Anyone find any? I know this group doesn't have any hang-ups to the childhood limits. So again, that's another aspect of Buddhism that gets beyond the thank you, but it's this thank you that I think is something that is useful for without translating a lot of doctrine and words and so forth. And then with this shift, I want to get into more Shin doctrine but it will reflect back on gratitude and acceptance. So, what are some thoughts on what I just said about the psyche, higher and lower unconscious, that it takes accepting the negative to see the greater acceptance? Again, that's a little difficult because the higher unconscious is what we might call the spiritual realm. And that's always hard to define.
So is it kind of like an analogy, like the symbol of the lotus, that it has to come up pretty much from muck, and it becomes the most beautiful flower, which I think is saying that we have to go like really, really low as far as our experiences, our problems, to actually learn and develop a higher understanding of what life is about. That's kind of the way that I see it.
Yeah, yeah. See, and that part's difficult. That's why I hesitated to get into that, but that's a lot more about what Nembutsu is about, Namo Amida Butsu. Because we actually have a mechanism that keeps us from seeing the shadow. Plotkin calls it the loyal soldier. The loyal soldier, it's like the Secret Service. They will not let you get to your ego. It protects your ego, but it protects it at that youthful level, the childhood level. But this is why you can't see your faults. Your wife can. A spouse or a good friend or whatever can see it. And they'll point it out to you and say, that's not me, that's that jerk who sits over there. But it's really difficult because we have a mechanism that doesn't let us see ourselves. And this is why you need to go into therapy and so forth and spend many, many hours, in a safe environment to see that. But once you can start to let that out, then you can see that higher unconscious.
And I think that I don't think we're ever really ready to see our shadow. I've noticed that when having a conversation with, let's say with my wife, for example, we want to deal with something, and I may be the one saying, hey, okay, you know what? Whatever is bothering you, whatever you see wrong in me, go ahead and tell me. And then once she tells me, I don't like I mean, you ask for it, and then you don't want to accept it. You're like, well, I can't understand what you're saying, but I'm not really like that way. And pretty much you are. But it's hard. It's hard to really accept it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the difficulty of it.
But also, isn't somebody seeing you, Arturo? They're seeing you through their filter and who they are. I think that has to be taken into account too. I don't think the husband, the wife, the partner is always right.
Right. Because you're right. That person has their own shadow, and the word projection. Your issue when you see someone you don't like, that's your shadow. That's a good way of seeing your shadow is the person, and then. You can't stand that type of person because that's your shadow. And that's the hardest thing to see, that jerk out there is who you're hiding.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
But it can be freeing. But it comes out in two ways. Either when you feel really safe, you work with a therapist or a person and you feel real safe that you can see it, or you're really threatened and then you can see it. But this shadow stuff is difficult, and I don't like to get into it. That's what Shinran always talks about when he talks about the evil self, and that's another reason I think the way it's presented in Japanese is difficult in America, because Japanese, the culture has accepted this, what we call the humility. You always take the stance that you're less than the other person. That's publicly, outwardly you give that notion. Inwardly, you're saying, I'm not that bad. I'm better than, that critic out there. But anyway, And so in Japanese, you could criticize yourself or others, and it seems to work. But then deep down, I don't think we accept, our own criticism. But anyway, that's the language that we read continually, and I think it's kind of detrimental when we interpret the words as that my evil self, because we tend to gloss over those words and say, well, that's for other guys in the class, not me. So anyway, I've been trying to soften it and put a little, not talk too much about that dark side of us, which I think in Shin Buddhism we tend to do. And that doesn't seem to attract people. Let's see. What parts, what would people like to hear more, as we go along?
I'd like to hear more about the concepts of no self and the duality. That's the thing I have the hardest time with.
Okay.
Letting go of duality.
Okay, I'll just say something simple right now. The thing about duality, I think the word balance is a good way to hear that. There's always going to be that, opposite side. And so I think from an American standpoint, we want the 51% good, or we want to be 99% good, But I think if we look at it as just balancing, if your life sucks, it's because we're looking at the clouds of greed, anger, and, ignorance. And so we don't have to blow all the clouds away, just some of the clouds so it's even. So I really think that the Buddhist middle path, the balance, is important. That we accept it's 49, 51%, 50-50. It's just as balanced. And so, again, this is where the thank you comes in when we say, oh, there are some positive things. And that, so I'll leave it there right now, but I'll try and work out more on the balance. And then, what was the first part you said, before balance?
No self.
No self, yeah. Again, I think that's a misinterpretation. You can't get rid of the self. It is the separation of the individual self. That what we need to do is identify as a bigger self. And then I always give the example of Martin Luther King and Gandhi, but then also the self that you can identify yourself. Like you could go on TV, Evelyn, and you could say, I am SD, what is it? I'm UC, I'm not UC.
SDSU.
Yeah, SDSU, right?
Right.
So what that commercial is saying is that one person is a whole university, right? And you could say that too. So what I'm saying is that we naturally do this in family, or in a group, that we identify with others as being part of us. And that the Buddha may have been talking about really eliminating the boundaries of the self and others, but that's for monks and nuns who can only do that all day long. But for those of us in the real world, working and doing all the things we do, it is the sense of expanding yourself to include others. And then those others that you include that you don't like, that's your shadow.
Thank you.
So, well, I'll think of, some ways that we might, work around that. But right now, that's my standard response, is that it is about balance. So again, we need to work out a practice to where we see balance in things. And this is where, I don't know, Bill, if other people have mentioned this, but in that, Shoshinge, right after Shinran talks about the lightness under the clouds, he says there's a crosswise shift. When we awaken, there's a crosswise shift. And I've always taken that as meaning it's a shift in our perspective. When you go sideways, you have a different view of things. And so the shift from please to thank you, or going from flipping the coin from what I want to what I have is this crosswise shift. So I really feel that what he's saying is, if things aren't going well, look at it from a different perspective. And then there is a thank you. It may not be all thank you, but it's, again, balancing it so that we start to accept things as they are. And then again, it's a practice. We get better at it. And if this is a new concept for you, it'll take some time. If you're already doing some of this, we can just improve on that. But those are part of the things I think is a Buddhist way of living, is the sense of balance, evening out the positive with the negatives, and then even the self, that we just want to enlarge ourselves. I guess one way to do that, enlarging ourselves, is to accept others. As we feel others accept us, we accept others. Does that sound doable?
It's a beautiful ideal, Sensei.
Yes. Namanda. We bodhisattvas do it all the time.
How can you accept people that don't wear masks?
Oh. Yeah, I know some people are real good at that. I feel like saying something in a very rude way, but I'm always too chicken to do that. Yeah. Yeah. I remember in San Jose, at our board meetings, a subject would come up and I'd always be thinking, oh, that jerk. And then there's one woman who was very diplomatic, would say something in a very kind way. And I thought, oh, gee, that's nice. I wish I had thought of that. And I'm just thinking about, oh, I wish that jerk would shut up. So some people are better at it than others. And those of us who aren't so good have to practice. Yeah.
Sensei, as you think about future sessions, I don't know if there's real content here or not, but for me, I actually don't quite see the relationship or linkage between the concept of Nishu, Jinshin, and the 18th vow. I want to see it. Sounds great.
Yeah.
I want to say, oh yeah, that's how I should understand it, but my brain's not making those connections as well as probably you understand them.
Yeah, it's not clear, but because in the 18th vow, it doesn't have that negative part so much, but it is just the sense of being accepted, the higher unconscious part, because it doesn't require that we admit to our negative self. But it is this whole sense that it comes from outside. It's not my achievement, because this is where I do conflate some things. Yeah, you're probably well aware of that. And that this whole thing about being accepted, the other, efforts of others, all of that. What I want to actually do is get into Amida Buddha and Nembutsu, again, as an experience more than a definition, because we've given some definitions, but what is this Namo Amida Butsu? And so that's something I was going to do. Why don't we do that? Yeah, maybe for next time too. Can people email me on your thoughts? Shinran lists a whole page of his impression of Amida Buddha. And so could you write me what your thoughts, what your perception is of Amida Buddha? Yeah, and whatever. Okay. Yeah, and then that will help. And then whatever I say is not Amida Buddha. That's my perception of Amida Buddha, light and life. But again, that's core to Shin Buddhism. And sometimes I think, we don't emphasize that enough. It is emphasized, but Amida Buddha is often depicted theistically. And in Japanese, it seems to work, but in America, it doesn't seem to work as well. It doesn't work with me. Amida Buddha, accept me as I am. It does at times and it doesn't at times. And there are definitions of Amida Buddha, but anyway, how do people feel about that? Writing in your experience of Amida Buddha, how you perceive that? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you talking about it next week? Is that what you're talking about?
Why don't you send me your thoughts on that? I'll have something I could look at and work on, So, by next Tuesday at midnight. Ways this due, because, again, we can work on, why do we say this, Namo Amida Butsu all the time? What I've been trying to do is put experience behind some words and some, concepts that we throw around all the time. We use all these words and things. And in my experience, this is what Shin Buddhism is about. My father-in-law was a minister, and he was all about Nembutsu. But in that older generation, it was much easier because people had a sense of it because of their parents and grandparents and living in Japan and so forth. It was kind of all around. It's like, God help us, in America, that notion is just all around. In Japan, it was, the Buddha was there. But here, I think we need to clarify that a little more, Amida Buddha. You can look it up on Google, see what Google says. If I see too many of the same definition, I'm going to look up Google and see what he said.
Copy paste.
Okay. What other thoughts are there?
For me, I think, I'm trying to be grateful, and if something bad happens, this is a learning, or we can, move forward or learn from it. But I think it's also difficult when you're not in that same page with those around you. So either work or family, that you're trying to be grateful, but then maybe you have someone negative in your life, and I think that's sometimes hard for me, that I'm, trying to be positive and thankful, even for those bad things. Yeah. And I think sometimes people can be so negative or just stay in that mindset that it's kind of hard to, to stay positive or thankful, even when and there's people that have to be in your life that can be that way. Yeah. So I think for me, that's sometimes hard is, sometimes they bring me down. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So again, depends on who and how close they are to you. But one, we can't change other people. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. And again, it's probably due to a childhood, not only one incident, this primal wound, which recurs and recurs and recurs and becomes part of one's life. And that becomes a truth of a person's life, that life is this way. But what it's defending, and the reason that person lives and feels that way, is that it's what we call a survival mentality. It's a way that protected that young child. That child couldn't do anything except believe that life is this way. Now, for that to change, we call that a shift to an authentic. Well, there's a term, authentic unifying self. All these fancy terms. It just means that a person can sense who they really are. And this is what young people might do. This is what this whole thing I was doing on Vision Quest. You grow up with the survival unifying center, which means that there is this, you see yourself, don't you think you see yourself with another eye? Do people see that? Who am I? Well, there's some eye that's looking at you and say, well, Karina, you're this way. Kenji, you're that way, And is that me, or is that, anyway, that's a unifying center. And we start off with the survival type. And some of us become high political leaders and still have that survival center. But it's nice if when we reach adulthood that you can shift into an authentic. In other words, you find out who you really feel you are, regardless of what your parents or the community want you to be. You want to be an artist or, you know, jokester or whatever. That's what you are. And so there is a shift that can't, you know, it's a mature change of life. So that's what you hope that other person will do. But then that's up to them. And you may not be able to do it. So on your own part, you know, how you're affected by the other, again, it depends on how close you are. But sometimes I tell people, what if a 5-year-old were to call you a knucklehead or to call you a name? How would you feel? Yeah.
I'd start laughing.
It would matter.
Yeah. Okay. Then what is it when a coworker or a acquaintance says, "Oh, that dress you're wearing is, you know, doesn't suit you," and you feel really hurt?
It
You give
hurts
that
more.
person power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what they're saying is, again, hitting your childhood primal wound. So to begin to realize that you can accept that. Just think of that 5-year-old, you know, instead of that person, think of a 5-year-old saying that. You know, 5-year-old saying, "Oh, that dress looks ridiculous on you." Yeah, so what? You know, what does that kid know? You know, so what does that person who criticized you know about you? So just shift that comment to a 5-year-old kid saying something that, you know, shouldn't impact you. Because when you do accept it as a critique, you're empowering that other person. And we live our lives that way. Don't you want to do your best to show off that person you hate? Right? Among your friends, you just sloppy, you know, you're yourself. But then the person you're not too sure about, you want to look your best and, you know, make sure you do everything right. So we live our lives out for people we don't like rather than be comfortable at home. So, yeah, so that's kind of, yeah, it's hard, but I don't know if that's a little helpful.
There it was. I'll think of people as 5-year-olds.
Well, let me just ask too. I think it's up to you, of course, but I'd be interested in see if other people think that this Zoom approach is satisfactory.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to hear the conversation myself, but if this is a way, if any of you have thoughts on whether we should continue Buddhism 1, 2, 3 in this fashion as opposed to supplying a pre-recorded video for that Wednesday night.
So I kind of like this format because I do like the videos, but I've always seen Buddhism 1, 2, 3 as precisely this.
Yeah.
You can have this conversation, and it's not just one way.
Yeah, I get tired of the one way, just blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Sunday, blah, 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 Wednesday, blah, blah. And yeah, this feedback or discussion, you know, and to hear other people, you know, come in and say, well, I think, you know, it's this or that. Yeah.
It's going to depend on whether I remember it's Wednesday and that it's 7 o'clock. I'm having trouble keeping track of days now because they're all the same.
Yeah.
I don't have the landmarks I used to have, the time landmark.
I know, yeah. So
I kind of think it would be nice to have maybe 2 videos and then or 1 video and then a group and then another video and then a group, or sometimes we can say, hey, we're going to discuss the video. So we're going to watch it the first Wednesday and then come together the following Wednesday to discuss some points. I don't know. But then again, I like the videos and this I like as well. But
yeah, I was getting
I kind of don't want to give up one for the other.
Yeah, it was getting a little difficult for me because in my mind, I would do Sundays as a service, you know. And then I found that for the Wednesdays, I was following a different pattern. But then it alternated, you know, how we did it.
Yeah.
So I started to think, oh, if people are watching it, it's not really connected, you know. So what we could do is talk about what I talk about on Sunday. But although it's a little easier to, the only thing on Sundays is, they're like this Sunday will be on Memorial Day, that type of thing. And the one thing I'd like is to have kind of a series. That's what I was trying to do in the last 3 series, that emphasize and give a rationale on why we practice, why there's gratitude, why there is this process of bringing gratitude into our lives as a artificial practice, and how that eventually will lead into Nembutsu. Because it is this Namandabs that helps us shift our thinking and say, oh, I might think of something I'm grateful toward, or Namandabs, it's okay. This terrible incident, I'm okay. Because this Namandabs has a real deep quality to it when you have an experience, that it's what you say. Well, I'll give that talk sometime on how I used the example of a young boy growing up and the grandfather saying Namandabs. It represents joy, sadness, confusion, all these different things. I remember Reverend Yamaoka saying when the Ninja Turtles were popular, telling the young kids, Kawabanga.
Kawabanga.
Yeah, that's Namandabs. Hey! It has so many qualities to it, and yet we talk about it in reference. And I recommend something. I don't do it openly, but I'll talk about it later on, to have you experience Namandabs in many, many emotional states. And not just the sacred ones, but the unsacred ones, because it is very, very deep. And so it's that experience of Namandabs. And again, thank you is just the first step of it. And unless we start on some step, it just stays out there as, some philosophy, at someday. In fact, I know a minister who keeps saying, someday everything will turn out right. And it's like, what's the process? I get upset with some things. Anyway, there needs to be a process. And go paint the fence, wax the car, and say thank you. But okay, so got off on my tangent here.
Sensei, I did have another housekeeping item, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
And that is that I didn't ask people ahead of time, and you may not be comfortable telling me now, but our hope is that we could go ahead and post a record of this Zoom session for those who weren't able to attend. But some people may be shy about that. Tell you what, I'll reach out to each of you who attended tonight. I'll just send you a note asking you if you think that's okay, or if you have some restrictions, or if you just want to say my audio is okay but not my video, or whatever you think is fine, because we'll always have Kenji Sensei to look at. So. Thank you.
Can you just put, before someone turned on the light, I think I looked a lot better and darker.
Sure, whatever you want.
Yeah, my thought at one point, I was thinking maybe I would talk for 10 or 15 minutes on the subject and then the discussion. So maybe
sure.
That would probably be better.
Yeah, videotaped, and then the second, where everyone discusses, then you could pick and choose if you want to be on or not.
Okay.
But, might think about that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
We may drift into Amida Buddha. I think you all have my email. kenjiakahoshi@gmail.com, and we'll get into Amida and then get hopefully
what the blood got.
Any other comments or discussions or questions or answers? We want answers. This is a question and answer.
I have a question, I guess. I've seen that they're talking now about maybe having services for people outside. Is that something that you've talked about at the?
Well, Ralph just mentioned that, and that might be difficult. I'm trying to figure out. I think what we may have. I'm really adamant about not bringing people to an in-person service, and I've been writing and giving some what I feel are Buddhist justification. And I have a kind of a health background, so biology background. I think this push to open up the economy and all that is fine, but the bottom line has to be health. And that is so tenuous. And none of the places opening up really can substantiate that it is safe. You know, it's sort of safe, but not safe. So for me, I'm waiting for the next 2 weeks to make more decisions on how June and July, because I have a bunch of services that are kind of backed up. And I think I'll start doing some, if the people are open to it, Zoom services. Okay, why don't we close for now? And homework is, your idea or impression or experience of Amida Buddha. And then we'll talk about that and other things. And then, like Bill said, he'll get with you to see if, how we interact here online or recorded. Okay, please join me. Thank you for your attendance. Gasho, Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Dab, Namo Dab, Namo Dab, Namo Dab.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.
Bye.